Woolly Story. Welcome to my cozy little corner of YouTube, where you can unwind and drift off to sleep while listening to some soothing bedtime stories. This is the perfect place for those who want to absorb new vocabulary while listening to bedtime stories before drifting off to sleep. So get comfy, relax, and let me help you drift off into dreamland. The world as John knew it had come to an end. A deadly virus had swept across the globe, turning people into flesh-eating zombies. John had been on his way to work when the outbreak occurred. Chaos erupted on the streets, and John had been forced to take shelter in a high-rise building. As he watched the chaos outside from the safety of the building, John knew that the world he knew was gone forever. He was trapped inside, surrounded by other survivors who were just as scared and confused as he was. They huddled together, sharing whatever food and water they had left. Days turned into weeks, and the survivors in the building started to realize that the outside world was never going to return to normal. The streets were infested with zombies, and the few remaining survivors were scattered and struggling to survive. John was determined to make the best of the situation. He knew that he had to do whatever it takes to survive, and he was willing to help his fellow survivors in any way he could. He scoured the building for supplies and managed to find some food and water, but it wasn't enough to sustain everyone. One day, while exploring the building, John stumbled upon an unusual room. It was unlike any other room in the building, with strange symbols etched into the walls. As he approached the room, he felt a strange energy emanating from within. John cautiously entered the room and felt a surge of power flow through him. He suddenly knew that he had been chosen to become a magician. He had been imbued with a supernatural ability to protect the survivors in the building and help them to rebuild their lives. With his newfound power, John set out to help the survivors secretly. He provided them with food, water, and medical supplies, and he became their beacon of hope in a world overrun by zombies. He knew that the journey ahead would not be easy, but he was determined to help his fellow survivors in any way he could. John had accepted his role as a magician, and with his new powers, he began to help the survivors in secret. He would leave supplies outside their doors, heal their wounds, and keep watch over them during the night. He became a source of comfort and hope for the survivors, and they began to rely on him more and more. One night, John gathered the survivors together in the building's common area. He expressed his desire to rebuild their lives. At first, the survivors were skeptical and afraid, but as John explained his plan, they began to see the potential for a new future. Together, they set to work building a community within the building. They organized themselves into groups to collect and ration their supplies, to grow their own food, and to purify their water. John became their leader, but he knew that he had to keep his powers a secret from the other survivors. He knew that it would be dangerous for them to know the truth, as some might try to use his powers for their own gain. As the days turned into weeks, the survivors worked tirelessly to build a new life within the building. They constructed makeshift shelters, tended to their crops, and learned how to defend themselves against the zombie hordes that lurked outside. John was always there to guide them, using his powers to protect them from danger and to provide for their needs. Despite their hard work, the survivors faced many challenges. They struggled to maintain their food and water supplies, and many of them fell ill from the harsh conditions. But John never gave up hope. He knew that they could overcome anything if they worked together and remained determined. With John's guidance, the survivors slowly but surely began to rebuild their lives. They had created a new community within the building, and they were determined to keep it alive, no matter what challenges they faced. John and the survivors had successfully created a new community within the high-rise building. They had overcome the initial chaos and had begun to rebuild their lives. but they knew that they could not let their guard down. The zombie horde still lurked outside, and they were a constant threat to the survivors. John continued to use his powers to help the survivors in secret. He would sneak out of the building at night to scavenge for supplies, and he would use his abilities to heal those who were sick or injured. He remained the secret guardian of the community, and the survivors relied on him more and more. As time went on, the survivors grew more confident in their abilities to survive. They expanded their community within the building, creating new living spaces and working together to maintain their supplies. They began to develop a sense of normalcy within their community, despite the dangerous world outside. But one day, disaster struck. A group of zombies managed to break into the building, and chaos erupted within the community. The survivors were caught off guard, and many of them were injured in the attack. John knew that he had to act quickly to protect the survivors and to defeat the zombies. Using his powers, John fought back against the zombie horde. He created illusions to distract the zombies and used his strength to defeat them one by one. The survivors rallied around him, and together, they managed to defeat the zombies and secure the building. After the attack, John knew that they needed to do more to protect themselves. He worked with the other survivors to create a more fortified living space within the building, with reinforced walls and security measures. They trained themselves in combat and developed new strategies to defend themselves against the zombie threat. With their new defenses in place, the survivors felt more secure within their community. They continued to work together to rebuild their lives and create a new sense of normalcy within the building. John remained their secret guardian, always watching over them and using his powers to protect and provide for their needs. As time passed, John and the survivors had created a thriving community within the high-rise building. They had managed to establish a sense of normalcy, despite the constant threat of the zombie horde outside. But as their community grew, they began to realize that they could not survive within the building forever. John knew that they needed to find a way to leave the building and establish a new, safer home. He used his powers to scout the surrounding area, searching for a suitable location for their new community. After much searching, he found an abandoned military base that had been fortified enough to withstand the zombie threat. With a new goal in mind, the survivors set to work preparing for their journey. They gathered supplies and weapons, and John used his powers to heal those who were sick or injured. As they worked, they knew that the journey ahead of them would be dangerous, but they were determined to make it to the military base and start anew. As they made their way through the zombie-infested streets, the survivors encountered many dangers. They fought off hordes of zombies and navigated through treacherous terrain, but John's powers helped to keep them safe. He used his strength to clear paths and create illusions to distract the zombies, while the other survivors used their skills to defend themselves. After several grueling days of travel, the survivors finally reached the military base. It was a sprawling complex with fortified walls and a variety of buildings that could be used for living spaces and workshops. They knew that it would take a lot of work to make the base habitable, but they were up for the challenge. John and the other survivors set to work immediately, building new homes and fortifications within the base. They cleared out the zombies and established a new sense of normalcy within their new community. John continued to use his powers to protect and provide for the survivors, but he knew that their work was far from over. They still had to contend with the zombie threat and find a way to rebuild their lives in this new home. As the survivors settled into their new home at the military base, they worked tirelessly to rebuild their lives. John continued to use his powers to help the community in any way he could. He used his strength to clear out the remaining zombies in the area and create illusions to distract them when necessary. The survivors established a new sense of normalcy within the base, creating workshops and gathering resources to build new structures and fortifications. They knew that they needed to be prepared for any future threats, and they worked tirelessly to create a safe and sustainable home. Despite the dangers outside the walls of the military base, the survivors found new hope in their community. They worked together to plant crops and establish a sustainable food source. As the months passed, the survivors' community grew stronger. They established a system of leadership and worked together to create a thriving community within the walls of the military base. They even began to venture outside the walls on scouting missions, searching for other survivors and resources that could help their community. John remained the secret guardian of the community, always watching over them and using his powers to protect and provide for their needs. He knew that their work was far from over, but he felt a sense of pride and satisfaction in seeing the community thrive and grow stronger. However, the survivors knew that they could not be complacent. They knew that the zombie threat was still out there, and they needed to be prepared for any future attacks. They continued to work tirelessly to improve their defenses and gather resources, knowing that their survival depended on their ability to adapt and overcome any obstacle that came their way. As time passed, the survivors at the military base continued to build a thriving community. They had created a safe and sustainable home, and they had even started to rebuild a sense of civilization within the walls of the base. John continued to use his powers to protect and provide for the community, but he had also become a mentor and a friend to many of the survivors. He shared his knowledge and skills with them, teaching them how to defend themselves and how to live in harmony with the world around them. As the community grew stronger, they began to venture further and further outside the walls of the military base. They encountered other survivors, and they started to form alliances with nearby communities. They shared resources and knowledge, and they worked together to create a network of communities that could survive and thrive in the world after the zombie apocalypse. John knew that their work was far from over, but he felt a sense of hope and optimism for the future. He knew that the world was full of danger and uncertainty, but he also knew that there was still beauty and goodness in the world. As he looked out at the world beyond the walls of the military base, John felt a sense of purpose and fulfillment. He knew that he had been given a unique gift, and he had used that gift to help create a better world for himself and for those around him. And so, John continued to serve as the secret guardian of the community, using his powers to protect and provide for their needs. But he also knew that his true legacy would be the community that he had helped to create. A community of survivors who had come together to rebuild their lives and create a new sense of hope and possibility in the world after the zombie apocalypse. And that's it for tonight's story. I hope it made you feel all warm and cozy. Join me again tomorrow for another bedtime story. Good night. Sweet dreams.